Kajuro was too overcome with emotions and said that he did not have time to talk. He had to quickly find a way to save Hanami. Director Sota followed the stairs to the top and said that he was waiting for him on the roof. Kazuro looked at the old man leaving and thought that he did not hear him. Sarah approached them from behind. Trying to convince Kazuro that now is not the best time for thoughtless actions, she advised him to follow the director and discuss everything, especially since he saved them all from the enemy by fighting them. Having calmed down a little, Kajuro agrees to talk with the director and goes up to the roof. The director stood near the edge and looked at the beautiful view of the surrounding nature. Turning around, the director said that he was glad to see him here and wanted to talk to him about what happened. Director Sota asked the guy what they were doing before he passed out. Kajuro was afraid to reveal all the secrets since it was Hanami's secret place, and he didn't really trust the director to reveal all the secrets. Director Sota, realizing that the boy did not trust him yet, decided to give advice. If Kajuro wants to deal with the attackers, then he will have to undergo a test in the mountains to prove his ability to fight and survive. The director, showing the direction of the test, told the boy that he would have to fight very strong monsters. If he defeats them, he can achieve greatness and fight those mercenaries who harmed his girlfriend. If Kazuro agrees, then the director will help him master his powers. Kajuro agreed with the director's words to pass the test, but helping Hanami was more important, and he asked the director to give him advice on how to do this. Director Sota was glad to hear the agreement and promised that Hanami would not be in any danger under his supervision. The director said that he would teach Kajuro how to deal with his monsters and how to properly control them for defense and attack, and also teach him how to control the flow of mana for long-term use. Kajuro looked at the old man and remembered that he had already had moments, that he no longer had the strength, but the battle continued, and it would be very useful for him to manage his strength correctly. The old man was clearly wiser. His wisdom was great and worthy of a teacher. Kazuro bent down on one knee and promised to cope with all the tasks that the teacher set for him. He wants to take revenge on all enemies who can harm him and his friends. Director Sota stood calmly, but inside he was glad that he would have a worthy student who could cope with everything. After the conversation, the director asked the guy to come to him in the evening after classes. Kajuro and Po went to the training center for lessons. Kajuro held his head with the thoughts that he had slept through the first couple of days of the initial course of familiarization with the material, and it would not be easy for him, walking through the corridors of the training center and reaching the office, cheerfully talking about their admission. Kajuro was a little embarrassed that he had missed a lot and didn't know how to catch up with the others now, to which Po told him not to worry and everything would work out for him. Listening to Po's words of encouragement, Kajuro opens the doors to his office. There was noise and commotion in the class, and he hoped that no one would pay attention to him or focus on him, seeing that all the boys surrounded the girls in the class and tried to please them, giving gifts and compliments. The appearance of his classmates was not entirely attractive to Kajuro, and he did not understand what the boys saw in them. The reaction of surprise was strong. He was afraid that everyone was acting very strange towards such girls. When he lowered Kazuro to the ground, he said that the guys, seeing him with two beauties, became very jealous and began to look for a mate for themselves, not paying attention to their shortcomings. The girls felt very proud that so many guys were courting them, but they did not show any response. Every guy in the class treated the girls courteously and gathered in groups near each one. Kajuro looked at all this shame because of the appearance of Sarah and Hanami on the sports ground, which he was even ashamed of. He and the fat man sat down in the empty seats and prepared for the first lesson. Remembering what happened in the crypt, he notices the sign of the consumed ghost of a warrior on his hand. Kajuro was surprised, but did not feel the power of the ghost. Apparently, he was so strong that he was knocked out from absorbing such a huge amount of the monster's mana. Finally, the bell rang for class, and all the children began to take their seats and wait for the teacher. The class sat quietly, and Principal Sota, who would be teaching the lesson, walked through the door. The children in the back rows greeted the director with admiration, remembering his fight with the police. Principal Sota greeted the students and asked to welcome the new exchange students from Maochi Supreme Devourers University. They will study with them for a whole semester and take part in joint training. 3 children entered the class. These were Tsuyuki Lin and her brother Fen, as well as the daughter of the head of the Absorbers, Yui Aragaka. Director Sota greets the new students and introduces them to the children. The guys in the class immediately paid attention to their new classmates. They were so beautiful that the guys in the class lost their heads and fell in love with them immediately. The trio stood in front of the class and greeted all the students. They were glad that they would be able to study with them and train together and learn something new. Yui looked into the classroom and noticed Kajuro, who was very interesting to her father. Director Lin's children also knew him and said that the guy was not as simple as he seemed. She looked at the guy and thought to win his trust and find out all the secrets he was hiding. Maybe he is the one who his father needs so much, Yui thought. The director asked the children to sit down in the empty seats and get ready for the lesson. Yui, noticing an empty seat near Kazuro, immediately went to sit next to him, not paying attention to the loving glances of the guys. Sitting down next to Kazuro, she began to take off her backpack and prepare for the lesson. Po was surprised that another beauty was sitting next to Kazuro. Kajuro knew her from Hanami's stories. He didn't pay attention to Yui's words and was angry at her family for what they did to Hanami and her mother. He looked at her and realized that she had come here for a reason. Her father had probably sent her to find the one who had opened the warrior's tomb. Kajuro did not want to be near the enemy, who caused a lot of pain to his friends, so he stood up and asked to change places. Yui was surprised that he was so rude to her, but trying not to attract attention, she agreed. She started to get up from her seat, thinking that he just wanted to sit near the exit, but his gaze and rough voice showed an incomprehensible anger towards her. Kazuro walked past her and sat not next to her but on the first desk. Yui was surprised by this behavior because every guy would dream of sitting next to her, but Kazuro ignored and tried to avoid talking to her. The guys were surprised that Kazuro refused to sit with such a beauty and decided that apparently his girlfriend was very jealous and forbade him to sit with other girls. The other guy said that maybe he knew the new girl and he knew her better, so he moved. The guys began to suspect that the girl must have a very bad character, that Kazuro was running away from her like that. Yui sat with her eyes downcast, not understanding why Kajuro did this. The director said that enough talking and let's start the lesson. He asked to get textbooks on spell control and open the second chapter. After class, Kajuro went to the library. He was haunted by the dream that he had. It was very familiar, and he had seen it somewhere. Approaching a shelf of history books, he began to look for a suitable book that might contain this story. Having found suitable books about the history of the ancient world, he began to take them out from the shelf. After going through several books, he finally found the one that reminded him of the dream. Opening to the page that depicted the house and throne that was in the dream, he began to read the story of what was happening on the pages. It was a legend about a hero who saved the country from monsters and stood guard over the city of Fuji, named after the mountain. The warrior was a powerful swordsman and was able to control his blade with magic. Many warriors and monsters fell to his blade. Kazuro remembers that the tomb was opened only to him for a reason. Apparently he had the blood of that very hero in him, or he was a close relative of the one who was connected with that swordsman. Realizing this, Kajuro decides to call his father to ask him about it. Maybe he knows something, although this is strange because he is a simple farmer or is hiding something, Kazuro thought. The father didn't pick up the phone for a long time and Kazuro became a little worried. If the mercenaries are looking for Kazuro, then maybe they are looking for his family. Such thoughts only made the boy more worried about his family. The father calls back and begins to greet his son in a joyful voice. He said that he was on a train and was passing through a tunnel, and there was no network there. But when he left, he saw that his son had called and called back immediately. Kajuro said he was worried and asked why he was on the train, and the guy had some questions about who his ancestors were. The father laughs and reassures his son that he is going to visit him to bring some vegetables that they grow. Otherwise, in the city, you eat only chemicals. Father will arrive soon and he needs to hang up. Kazuro, hearing his father's voice, calmed down, but he did not answer the question about his relatives. Maybe when he arrives, they will talk about it. Suddenly, Yui appears near Kazuro and asks what he is reading here. Kazuro, frightened, immediately turned away from her and refused to discuss anything. She tried to behave tactfully, and with her beautiful eyes trying to get the guy to talk. He refused to talk to her about anything and asked her not to get in his way. He was not interested in her, Kajuro said. Yui was very surprised because she had just come to their class and he was avoiding her. Yui starts screaming from not understanding why he treats her like this and avoids her. Kajuro replies that he doesn't want to have anything to do with people like her. Having caught up with Kazuro and standing in front of him, not allowing him to pass, she begins to ask the guy why he treats her so badly, why he doesn't want to talk and make friends. Pushing her aside with his hand, Kajuro said that he had never seen such cruel and ruthless people as her family. Yui stood confused and did not continue to pursue the guy. She began to understand that the boy might know her father and therefore was avoiding. Meanwhile, behind Yui there was a group of guys who were watching her and wanted to get to know each other. They saw Kajuro send Yui and were surprised. The strong surprise of one guy forced him to go and teach Kazuro a lesson for such behavior with a girl, while the other looked and admired Kazuro for being able to refuse such a beauty attention. After classes and visiting the library in search of information, evening came. Kazuro prepared to go to the director's office for further instructions. Having reached the office, Kajuro knocked. The light was not on inside, and the guy thought that the director was not yet there. After trying to turn the handle, the office opened and Kazuro came in to take a look. Unexpectedly, Kajuro is attacked in the director's office with a dagger in his hands. This was very unexpected, and the guy did not have time to react. At high speed, the dagger, fueled by mana, approached Kazuro's chest. All life and fear begin to flash through the guy's eyes. Kazuro's chest cavity. The guy in a state of shock does not feel pain but realizes that the wound is very deep. The sensations of pain disappeared. The body began to emit an aura like that of a ghost. Opening his eyes slightly, Kazuro begins to feel a surge of strength and incredible power in his body. The guy's body changed. His hands turned into bone and a blade appeared in his hands, exuding enormous strength and power. The attacker turns out to be Director Sota. He was very surprised by Kazuro's changes, and the fact that the ghost is able to control the guy's body surprised him. Managing to block the blow from the boy's bony body, Director Sota uses enormous force to resist the blow. The ghost swordsman's power was very strong, and Director Sota was unable to resist it. The blow was so powerful that he simply flew away with one swing of the sword. The director flies into the wall from a strong blow. The mark in the wall spoke of great strength, and the cracks and crumbling of the wall spoke of power. The swordsman's power completely restored Kazuro's body and saved him, but after being reflected, it slowly began to fade, and the boy became the same. Director Sota, after a strong blow to the wall, stood on one knee leaning on the floor. The director apologizes for his actions, explaining that he saw the guy's mark as a swordsman and wanted to test what he was capable of, and the fact that the boy was filled with power spoke of the great power of the ghost. Kajuro draws attention to the hand and says that he himself saw the sword's sign, but did not feel the presence of the monster and could not summon it. Director Sota rose to his feet, walked to the wall, and turned on the light. Kajuro stood and looked at the director in confusion. The director, with a serious face, tried to explain to the guy that his swordsman has enormous power, but so far he does not know how to control the monster. The director attacked the guy to release his strength to improve his condition. Kajuro stood scratching his head and told the director that he attacked him with a dagger and hit him, and if the monster had not appeared, then what? The director replied that he hit a vulnerable area without touching the organs, so the boy would simply get stitches and that's it. Suddenly, the director's confident stance turned into a hunched old man who was coughing from chest pain. Such a strong blow definitely left marks after hitting the wall. Kajuro was a little frightened by the teacher's condition. Realizing that it was he who hurt him, the boy felt a little ashamed. Hiding his injuries, the director told Kazuro that everything was fine. He was just getting old and his body was failing him a little. Kazuro ran up to the teacher and, grabbing his hand, led him to the sofa and sat him down. Fearing for his condition, the guy was worried that he could seriously harm the director while being out of his mind. Sitting down on the sofa in the office, the director smiled and said that the boy should try to find an approach to the swordsman's monster, and then he would be able to fight with anyone with such strength. But this could take a lot of time. Kazuro, fearing for Hanami's life, remembers that she is now lying in the ward because of him, and he doesn't have time to master and prepare. He needs to act faster. The director, understanding the boy's words and his bitterness, suggests trying to repeat the murder attempt, but only if you have to get into a fight with the monster and let him kill you. Then the swordsman's soul will appear to save you. Kazuro was glad that Nada would just fight the monster and die. Then he could call the swordsman again and try to subdue him. To celebrate, Kazuro decides not to hesitate and go to the cemetery, where he fought monsters as soon as he arrived. Director Sota was surprised by the boy's strong desire to die that he didn't even know what to say. Trying to stop the guy, the director stood up and asked Kajuro to think it over carefully. "Here you have to be ready to give your life, and it's not that easy to do." Kajuro, smiling, said that in principle, he was ready to die if it would help subdue the swordsman and save Hanami. Then the director had nothing more to say, and he asked the guy to be careful and choose the enemy as strong as possible so that the swordsman's monster would definitely help. Having heard the director's advice, Kazuro agreed and joyfully went to look for adventures, waving to the director along the way. After leaving, the director stopped holding back the pain and relaxed. The body was buzzing and there were many fractures. Judging by the coughing up of blood, the ribs were in splinters. Director Sota felt hellish pain and understood that the boy possessed a unique monster that he had always been looking for, but only a chosen one could possess such a thing. Hoping to quickly meet a strong monster and fight, Kazuro ran as fast as he could toward the cemetery, not paying attention to Nina. 3 exchange students were standing near the school late in the day and saw Kajuro running somewhere. Fen was glad that the time had come to avenge his humiliation and fight him. Tsuyuki also wanted to teach Kazuro a lesson and agreed with Fen to follow the guy and finish him off. Yui understands their feelings, but forbids them, since they have not yet found the one who opened the tomb. And if it is Kajuro, then even more so they cannot kill him yet. Having decided to follow where Kazuro was going, the guys began to run after him without attracting attention. Yuya had her own interest in not killing the guy, because he knows something about her family. Kazuro ran out of the university grounds for now, not suspecting that he was being pursued. The guys behind tried to keep their distance and keep an eye on him. Kazuro ran in search of a strong opponent. Running through crowds of weak zombies, he rushed without stopping. A company of pursuers had already appeared behind. Fen begins to notice the monsters around and got a little tense. He was weak and lost 2 monsters when fighting with Kajuro, so it would be hard to get caught by the monsters. Tsuyuki also sees crowds of low-level dead, but the enemy's numerical advantage can take him by surprise. Kajuro runs in search and turns his head. Suddenly he notices that 3 exchange students are running after him. He hopes that they will fall behind, run into a crowd of monsters, and lose him. Seeing in front of him the same vampire who had greeted him and Po so cordially and wanted to kill him. Kajuro decided that this was a suitable monster to fight and ran towards it. He began to greet the monsters in an attempt to stop them and draw attention to himself. The vampire, accompanied by 2 of his servants, walked with a human leg on his shoulder. Overtaking the monsters, Kazuro stands in front of them and begins to ask the vampire to fight him. The monsters were surprised by such fearless impudence. Kazuro begins to invite the vampire to throw away the rotten leg and fight him, and also to taste fresh human flesh, taunting him. This greatly irritates the vampire. Such impudence and stupidity for an ordinary boy to jump in front of such a ferocious, high-ranking monster. Upon closer inspection, the vampire senses a strong aura and becomes frightened. He remembers that there was once a warrior with the same strength as the guy. Kajuro, without hesitation, takes the vampire's hand without showing fear. The monster thinks that the boy has completely lost his sense of self-preservation, which is why he so brazenly pesters the monster with a request to fight. Kajuro puts the monster's hand on his neck and asks him to kill him. The monster begins to think that the boy is crazy. A normal person would not react so joyfully to the desire to die, or the power that the vampire felt was real, and it was better not to confront this guy. The vampire again feels a strong aura when he touches the guy and jumps away from him. Now he is sure that the guy just wants to test his strength and is mocking them. The vampire said that he had too important a meeting to stain his suit with the boy's blood and refused to fight. Kajuro, surprised, does not understand why the monster refuses. Is this possible? They usually attack without hesitation, But here he even put his neck in his hand, and he jumped away. Kazuro decided not to give up, and began to catch up with the monsters. Clutching the vampire's hand, the boy began to beg him to fight or just kill him. The vampire no longer knew how to get rid of the guy, and began to come up with excuses to get rid of the guy. The vampire said that the boy had a disgusting smell, and that's why he didn't want to eat him, and he didn't want to go to the wedding after eating stinking meat. It will also scare away the guests. Kazuro began to sniff himself, and was surprised. Raising his head, he noticed that the vampire and his servants began to run away very quickly. Apparently, they wanted to get rid of the guy this way. Kazuro realized that the monster had tricked him and decided to catch up. The vampire was sure that he had broken away from the boy. Suddenly, Kazuro catches up and matches the monsters. He begins to ask the vampire to take him at least to someone who can kill the guy. The vampire can no longer withstand such persistent requests from the boy that he begins to beg him to leave them alone. Kazuro says that he will leave behind when they kill him. Suddenly, the vampire stops and begins to beg on his knees for Kazuro to leave them alone. They can't kill him because he scares them. Fen and his sister, hiding behind a stone, see how the monsters begin to bow to Kazuro. Standing in the cemetery, Kazuro was very surprised by the reaction of the monsters that he did not know what to say. The surprise of the brother and sister was incredible. They had never seen anything like this, for a monster to worship a person without being absorbed. They began to suspect that Kazuro had greatly progressed in absorbing and controlling monsters, that he was able to control their minds and force them to do anything. Yui began to calm the guys down by saying that there was no need to push things. We were just keeping an eye on the guy, and, if necessary, using force. And with Kazuro, Yui will figure it out on her own. Meanwhile, Kazuro lifts the vampire from his lap and asks him to take him with him. Maybe there will be that monster that is capable of killing the boy. The vampire reluctantly agrees, but warns that he is not a welcome guest and may simply not be allowed in. Kazuro decides to try and follows along with the vampire and his servants. Fen, his sister, and Yui watch the guy and decide to follow them. As you get closer to your destination, more and more monsters begin to gather around. Some people stare at Kazuro and don't understand why he's here. The vampire accompanies Kazuro along the way, and around there are only more hungry glances wanting to taste the boy's flesh. One monster comes closer and asks the guy why he's walking so calmly with the monsters. Will he really be the main dish on the table? The monster joked. Kazuro, without being at a loss, invites the monster to try his hand and give his opinion about the main dish. The monster tensed a little and looked at the hand with a hungry gaze. Sensing a strong aura from the guy, he jumped away, just like the vampire. Realizing that something was wrong with the boy, he decided not to come close and go further away. Kazuro was again surprised that no one wanted to attack him. Seeing the bright light, Kazuro turns his attention to a beautifully decorated house located deep in the forest. Dozens of monsters converged on him. The vampire remembers that Kazuro was not alone when they fought, and asks where the plump bun that was with him when they first met. Kazuro replies to the vampire that he had some plans for Po, to which the vampire says that he must be very tasty, and Kazuro retorts by saying that he sleeps in a trash can and smells disgusting. The vampire began to laugh loudly at Kazuro's words and pull him along. Tsuyuki and her brother looked at the joyful vampire and Kazuro and were surprised at such a relationship. It all looked somehow suspicious, Tsuyuki said. There were dozens of monsters around, heading into one building, and Kazuro was walking there, accompanied by a high-level monster. Fen was confused and didn't understand what was happening. Yui suggested staying calm and sticking to the surveillance plan. We need to figure out how to get inside the building and find out where Kazuro was taken. Taking out 3 magic stones from their pockets with the ability to hide their identity, they planned to enter the building and reconnoiter the situation. After looking at the stones and then at each other, Fen agrees and accepts the stone first. The task that the head of the Devourers entrusted to them was very important, and it was impossible to fail. Throwing a stone into himself, Fen began to feel changes in power and waited for the result. Tsuyuki also made up her mind and threw a stone into her mouth. Walking inside, Kazuro notices a huge line of monsters bringing donations and gifts to their mistress. Kazuro suggested to the vampire that he present it as a gift. Finally, the vampire's turn has come, and he offers a living guy as a gift, trying to behave naturally. Kazuro, on the contrary, shows absolute calm and joy. The recipient of the gifts asks his colleague to take Kazuro to the room where he will be handed over to the main one. "Such a gift from a vampire is very valuable," said the butler. Pushing the boy into the gift room, they closed the door and continued to do their work. The room was ordinary and even decorated, reminiscent of a person's home. Kazuro begins to look around the room and hears everyone in the next room making noise and rejoicing. The guy begins to think that he is at some kind of monster drinking party. Kazuro starts kicking things around in anger. He needs to quickly test his monster swordsman and save Hanami. But here he doesn't understand what's going on. Red Eye senses a strong monster at the top and suggests to Kazuro that he should act faster, and there was no time to wait until he was brought to the main one. Seeing the window, Kazuro decides to open the window and climb out through it. While the monsters are hanging out and drinking, they definitely won't notice him. While Kazuro was trying to quietly climb out of the window, two little maids were already watching him. They were surprised by the guy's action, because he was getting into a crowd of monsters, and he was also a human. Jumping out of the window, Kazuro begins to run upstairs, running through the crowd of monsters, trying not to attract attention. Two maids again stand behind him and watch what the boy is doing. The girls had never seen such zeal among the mistress's guests, but they had never seen friends among people either. Approaching a large room at the top, Kazuro looked around and immediately decided to go inside. Opening the doors, Kazuro notices a girl sitting at the end of the room with her head covered. Her body looked like a goddess, and her dress was a little vulgar and short. Kazuro decided, without losing his head and time, to approach the monster. The girl felt the presence of someone strong with the help of her strength. The room was dark, as it was intended for a loving couple. The pleasant voice of the monster girl was a little embarrassing, as was her appearance. Kazuro, a little shyly, came closer to ask to fight him. Raising the veil, Kazuro is convinced of the beauty of the beautiful monster. She is a little embarrassed by such quick eagerness that she does not notice who lifted her veil. Kazuro begins to apologize for disturbing the beauty and ask to kill him, smiling with all his teeth with joy. Seeing that some impudent boy, and not even a monster, had lifted her veil, she became very angry. According to old traditions, the one who raised the veil should be the husband. Kazuro apparently did not know such a custom. Kazuro was glad that she was very angry, which means she could kill him and end the torment of mastering the sword monster. The bride monster calms down and makes a very strange decision, which leaves Kazuro shocked. She approaches the boy and hugs him, resting her body and embarrassed. She agrees to marry the guy. Kazuro was very embarrassed and surprised at the same time by such tenderness. Kazuro begins to get scared and frees himself from the bride's embrace. He was looking for death from a powerful monster, not life together in marriage. The bride monster behaves very seductively and wants to quickly start the newlyweds' first wedding night. Kazuro, frightened that everything is not going as he would like, begins to run away, trying to get to the exit. The bride uses her magic with the words that the boy will not leave the room until she receives what she has not experienced for so long. The doors closed with a loud slam. There was little chance of salvation. Kazuro felt fear from inexperience and the realization that the monster wanted to sleep with him. Pressed against the door out of fear, Kazuro began to beg to let him go or kill him, but he would not marry. He was still young and irresponsible in relationships, since they had never existed. Kazuro's tense face spoke of fear of what was to come. He wishes with all his heart that he would rather die than make love with a monster, even one so beautiful. Kazuro began to run from the beautiful bride around the table with various goodies. The bride behaved very playfully and allowed slight weakness in front of the boy without using force. From such runs and the guy's cries for salvation, he only turned her on more and made her fall in love with him. The girl, smiling, was just waiting for the moment to grab him and drag him into bed. Red Eye watched what was happening. It was very funny to him that the boy was so unlucky and no one could kill him. He only ended up in surrendered situations, such as this one. Kazuro begins to ask his eyes for help. Red Eye says he will try and starts making jokes about the beauty in the wedding dress. The girl was already starting to get tired of catching up, and the jokes of the Red-Eye were no longer necessary. Red-Eye with a smile began to tell the boy that he was worrying so much in vain, but he would have something to tell his friends. And at the same time, the first time will be truly unforgettable, the Red-Eye teased. Tired of pathetic attempts to stall for time, the girl decided to act more seriously and end this whole performance. Jumping up, she decided to grab the guy and throw him to the ground. Then he will not be able to resist the bride's strength and break free. Here, he will be doomed. Having thrown the boy face down, she pinned him to the floor and began to scold him for taking so long with foreplay. "Let's do the main thing now," the bride said. Turning Kojuro onto his back, she began to take off his jacket in order to quickly lie down. Kojuro could not escape and was very embarrassed. He wanted to cry and screamed, begging for help. Meanwhile, the groom whom the bride had chosen was already approaching the bride's chambers. Guests stood around and congratulated him on the holiday. At the entrance to the bride's chambers, her maids stood and greeted the groom. Having opened the doors, the groom sees the bride lying with some guy on the floor and hugging. Kojuro notices a huge monster and begins to rejoice that now he can definitely be killed. To celebrate, Kojuro begins to push the bride away, accidentally grabbing her by the chest. He tells the groom that he came to the bride's chambers and decided to have fun with her, having first removed the veil, pointing his finger at his neck and hinting that he should quickly kill such an insolent person. Kojuro was already hoping that everything would work out and the plan for the death and testing of the swordsman would begin to come true. Seeing the groom's huge cleaver, Kojuro approached and, touching the wooden handle, began to ask the groom to quickly deal with it. The monster begins to laugh heartily, holding his stomach. Kojuro doesn't understand what's going on and starts to get nervous. Along the way, taking off the groom's clothes and putting them on Kojuro, the monster with a huge cleaver laughed with happiness. Kojuro begins to realize that something is wrong here. The groom's clothes and the monster's laughter, and no aggression towards him. Having thrown off the last headdress of the groom, the monster began to rejoice that now he was free and did not have to get married. Kojuro was amazed that even monsters are not always ready for a serious relationship. Kojuro looked at the leaving monster laughing with happiness and was shocked. The boy clearly did not expect this. Now he had no chance of salvation. He didn't understand why this happened. What could make monsters suddenly treat humans so well? No one even tried to bite him. The bride, sitting down on the bed, began to call the boy to her in a gentle voice and reassure him that everything was just beginning. Their whole life was still in front of them. Such words only made Kojuro more frightened. He stood near the exit and decided to try his last chance to get out and save himself. Using control magic, the bride directs her hair towards Kojuro in order to grab and tie the guy. The hair begins to envelop the guy's arms and legs, preventing him from moving. Just before leaving, she manages to grab Kojuro. Screaming at the closing door and begging for help, he reached out with his hand towards the exit, but the door was closing and everything was already a foregone conclusion. Meanwhile, 3 guys who were chasing Kojuro enter the monster palace. Having used the stones to hide their power, they felt like they belonged among the monsters. They needed to find Kojuro and find out why he came here. Walking into the ceremony hall, Yui noticed that the vampire Kojuro had come with was sitting at the table. He sat with some monsters and drank. Yui decides that they should not attract attention and sit down next to the vampire and ask him where Kojuro was taken. Brother Fez and Sister Tsuyuki are a little nervous, but they agree with Yui and follow her. Noticing that there are 3 empty seats near the vampire, the guys begin to sit next to him. The vampire notices that 3 guys who don't look much like monsters sit down next to him. The vampire suspected something and asked where they were from. Fen, a little shyly, said that they came from another city. They had mutual acquaintances from the groom's side. The vampire thought that they were very hungry from the road. Having placed a piece of human intestines with gravy on Fen's plate, the vampire invited them to try such a delicacy, especially since they were probably hungry from the road and would not refuse to try such an exquisite treat. Fen immediately almost burned with disgust. He could barely restrain himself from vomiting. With this look, he would betray the boys and expose them to a crowd of enemies. The monsters sat and began to suspect something was wrong. Yui notices that everyone has started to look at them in surprise and suspects that they are not monsters. unless they prove otherwise. Yui puts her hand under the table and begins to pinch Fen so that he would pay attention to her faster. Covering her face with her hand, Yui begins to hint to Fen that he should not give them away, and quickly start eating the intestine with a big smile, or his career in absorbers will be over. Realizing that he is at stake, Fen begins to throw intestines into his mouth with both hands and says how delicious it is. Gravy runs down his hands. From the gaze of the monsters, the girls also began to try treats from the human body and, trying not to show their disgust, ate with a smile. Suddenly, a strong cry of joy is heard. Everyone turns their attention to the stairs from the second floor, along which a huge monster was descending, rejoicing and laughing. Everyone was surprised, since he was supposed to be the groom. Everyone started asking what happened. The monster begins to say that there was some little man who decided to take our beauty as his wife of his own free will. He saved me from death, said the huge monster. Everyone began to congratulate the huge monster with the cleaver and be happy for him. He did not become a victim of family fuss and remained a normal slacker. The guys, chewing on tasty pieces of human organs, felt bad enough. But when they heard that some guy would become a husband and this was a man, they immediately realized that we were talking about Kajuro. The vampire also realized that Kazuro would become the husband of the monster bride and was a little surprised. But he will get what he craved so much, the vampire said. Yui noticed that the vampire was thinking and asked him what happened to his companion along the way and why is everyone talking about a certain person. A vampire, realizing that they are not local and do not know their main history. He decided to tell them a story. Once upon a time, during the time of the Great Rebuilding, there lived a beauty. Her parents decided to marry her to a rich man, but at the wedding, someone poisoned him. Everyone thought that the bride did this, since she did not want to marry the first person she met, but only for love. Her family also thought so, and beat their daughter severely. They almost lost their heads for such an act of their child, and they had to give up all their property in order to survive. One day, when the girl was completely tired of the constant beatings of her parents, she dressed in a wedding dress and hanged herself. The parents were frightened by what they saw, but were not sorry. After death, she became a great and strong monster bride, and her only desire was to marry for love. But most monsters refused to marry, but that was no longer important. She was able to force anyone with her power. The problem was not the wedding itself, but the fact that every husband the day after the wedding looked as if he had dried up and was dying. No one knew how the bride sucked out their life energy. The vampire said that the boy who came with him was the bride's new husband. But don't worry, he will die anyway, and she will have to look for a new groom. Fen was terribly surprised that Kazuro decided to do this. If he wanted to experience new experiences in life, then for this there was no need to stick to a monster. The vampire, smiling, notices that Fen is also attractive and invites him to play the role of groom for their bride next time. Fen was scared because he didn't want to die and tried to refrain from answering, a little afraid. Fen hoped that Kazuro himself would be able to cope with the monster bride, and no one would have to die anymore. It's better to let him suffer. It will be revenge for the defeat in the arena and the loss of 2 monsters, Fen thought. The look of a slightly mentally unstable person and cold sweat enveloped Fen's body just from the thought that he would have to sleep with a monster. Tsuyuki, hearing that Kazuro will end, invites Yui to leave this place, realizing that he will not survive, and they must return to the university. Yui, hearing the proposal, thinks that we'll probably do that, but only if Kajuro really dies here. Yui looks at Tsuyuki and replies that she agrees to go, but only Nada makes sure that Kajuro does not return. Unfortunately, they won't be able to check since the room is locked and there are too many monsters around. One could only hope. Waking up after a long night, Kazuro felt very tired and weak in his body. He didn't understand what happened and why everything hurt. With force, he stood up and noticed that without clothes, a beauty was nearby and hugged the guy, asking him not to get up as he looked very tired. She invited him to rest a little more while she prepared him breakfast. Kazuro, brushing aside the attention of the monster bride, tries to get out of bed and find his things. The girl, continuing to cast her magic on the guy, tries to put him to sleep and force him to stay nearby. Hinting to the boy that he was on top and the night turned out to be very cheerful, she wanted him to stay. and they would continue to do family business together. Dressed and refusing any proposal from the bride, Kojuro tries to pack up and leave. His eyes showed apprehension and fatigue, but he felt no fear. He only wanted death. The bride said he was looking for death just so he could become a monster and live with her forever. Kazuro, through tears, replies that he will never live with a monster in his life, and he still needs to finish university and find a job before settling into family life. Having gotten dressed, Kazuro got ready to leave, simultaneously asking the bride not to stop him since he had to study. The girl lay in bed, continuing to inspire with her magic thoughts and desires for the boy so that he would return. Passing by the mirror, he notices that he has lost a lot of weight and is weak. Apparently, she is somehow able to fuel her strength by sucking the life juices out of others, Kazuro thought. Realizing this, Kazuro began to worry that he would not last long with her and would die. The girl, covering her sexy body with a silk blanket, approached the boy and said that he was the only one who lived until the morning. Kazuro was horrified by what he heard. Hugging the boy, she told him in his ear that he was the only one she loved and wanted to live with him all her life, simultaneously using the magic of winding. Kazuro, inhaling vapors of invisible power, unconsciously tries to resist the magic and get away. Showing her feelings and attitude towards the boy, she reaches out to kiss him. Kojuro tries with all his might to prevent her from doing this. Kojuro decides to try to find out through cunning about the monster that can kill him, so that they can always be together. The beauty replied that no one could kill the guy on her territory, but there was a place. In one forest, not far from them, there is a very strong monster, capable of doing what the guy wants. Having heard the information, Kazuro decided to clarify where exactly and where to go. The girl says that there is a forest in the west, where he will find that monster. Having heard everything that interested the guy, he gathered the remnants of his strength and rushed out of the room along the way, almost knocking over the mistress's maid. The maid, with a delivery and a cup of tea, sees the boy running again and asking the lady if she should intervene. Embarrassed with happiness, the bride replies that there is no need to worry. The boy himself will want to return to her. She was confident in her words and looked very happy. Having run through the forest and finally arriving at his room, Kazuro, dying of fatigue, grabs the handle to open the door. Opening the door, behind which Khan with his cleaver swung in a jump to attack. Kojuro was surprised and too tired that he thought it was already the end. Having barely managed to stop the blade near Kazuro's neck, Han was surprised. Kojuro broke out in a cold sweat from fear and did not understand what was happening and why Han attacked him. Han said with a surprised face that he thought there was a monster behind the door. Kojuro's aura was somehow corrupted and looked like a monster. Having woken up from the noise, he draws attention to the very tired Kojuro and asks what happened and where he was all night. Kojuro replies that he was carrying out the director's instructions and cannot say. Feeling very tired that his eyes were getting dark and his head was spinning, Kazuro said that he felt bad and he needed to stay at home. Climbing out onto his bed, Kazuro tries not to fall and go to bed, saying at the same time that he won't go to class today, and asked him to tell the director that he was sick. Han began to suspect that Kojuro had gotten into something bad. His aura was corrupted by the monster's aura, and it was very strange. The power of the shadow monster made it possible to evaluate the enemy's aura, and Kojuro's was very weak. First lesson in class, everyone is having fun and comes to the classroom to take their seats before the lesson. 3 exchange students, after a night of shadowing Kojuro, were very tired and sleepy, and when they went to class, they lay down on their desks and fell asleep. The weather was sunny outside and the warm rays warmed everyone in the class. Before class, Sarah enters the freshman's office in search of Kojuro, whom she has not seen since yesterday. She was a little worried because she knew that after his conversation with the director, he had run away somewhere. When he saw Sarah, he ran up to greet her and wish her a good day. He was a little nervous because he liked her very much, but he understood that his chances were slim. Sarah asked him if he had seen Kojuro, since yesterday he ran away somewhere after school. Poe said that Kojuro came back this morning very tired and exhausted. He had never seen him like this. The spy school children heard Poe's words that the boy had survived and were very surprised. Was Kajuro able to survive what that vampire told them? Fen said. Suyuki looked at her brother and couldn't believe it either. Apparently it is not as simple as it seems at first glance, said Suyuki. Meanwhile, Kazuro came to the infirmary, asking for some restorative medicine, yawning profusely and suffering from body aches. The doctor looked at the boy and advised him to devote more time to sleep and study, rather than an active and exhausting life while studying. Kazuro agreed with the doctor, but he still received the pills and with great desire began to immediately throw several into himself for a greater and faster effect. Yui and her brother and sister Lin walked past the doctor's office and saw a guy. He stood near the door and greedily ate the pills without leaving. Having thrown in the pills, Kazuro collected his thoughts and came to visit Hanami in the individual therapy room. He chewed on her behalf and wanted to tell her how much he missed her. Entering the room, Hanami was sitting on the bed and was already conscious. Kajuro was very happy, but realizing that she was still weak, he did not dare to touch her. He calmly sat down on a chair next to her bed and began a conversation. Hanami said that she woke up this morning. Kajuro acted a little confused and was glad that Hanami's condition was gradually improving. He wanted to tell her so much, but didn't know where to start and was a little lost. Hanami began to reassure the boy with the words that she had received worse wounds in her life and always got out of trouble. She was very pleased that he was so worried about her and embarrassed her a little.